So welcome everybody to this event hosted by Unlock Democracy and the Orwell Youth Prize. My name is Grace from Unlock Democracy. I'll be chairing tonight's webinar. We also have Tabby from the Orwell Youth Prize with us, and also some of the youth fellows who've won the prize either this year or in previous years, and we'll be meeting them very soon. Just a bit of housekeeping to get us started. So the format will be as follows. We'll kick off with some very brief introductions, then I'll hand over to our three first guests tonight, Arishi, Bella and Oluwatoni, who will give us, will set the scene and then read some of their work to us, and then we'll have a bit of discussion with them and open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have any questions for our youth fellows tonight, please put them in the Q&A box, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can also upvote your favorite questions there. So if you don't want to ask your own, but you see something that you really think should be asked, do upvote it. You can also use the chat, the normal chat function, just to chat with each other. So let us know where you're listening from today, and anything else that you want to chat about, and reactions to the pieces and so on. I think that's it for housekeeping. We are recording this event as well, so we'll be putting it up on YouTube afterwards. So I'm just going to quickly now pass over to Tabby from the Orwell Youth Prize, who's going to give us some background to the prize and some of the work that you'll be hearing tonight.
Thank you, Grace. Hi, I'm Tabby. I'm the Programme Coordinator of the Orwell Youth Prize, which is an annual creative writing competition for 12 to 18-year-olds, inspired by the works of George Orwell and his commitment to social justice, and asking young people to write creatively and critically about issues which matter today. The 2023 theme was Who's in Control, and you'll hear from two of our winners later tonight, as well as previous winners and runners-up from the 2021 and 22 prize cycles, who are part of our Orwell Youth Fellows programme and have been working on a special project on the theme of Who's in Control over the course of this year. Inspired by Orwell's 1984 and urgent issues today like the rise of AI and the climate crisis, they've created the satirical dystopian world of Digitalis, which you'll hear more about very shortly. We'll also be launching the 2024 Orwell Youth Prize in the autumn with a new theme and judging panel. So if you know any young people who may be interested, please do spread the word.
Thanks, Tabby. So now on to the sort of main event, the people that we're really here to hear from. Oluwatoni, Bella and Arishi are all former winners of the Orwell Youth Prize. So if you three could all just introduce yourselves to the audience, and then you're going to set the scene for the works that they're going to read to us today. So over to you three.
Hi everyone, I'm Arishi and I won the Orwell Youth Prize last year, and so I've been a youth fellow for about a year now.
Hi, my name's Bella. I'm 20 years old. I won the Orwell Youth Prize 2 years ago in 2021.
And hi everyone, my name's Oluwatoni. I won the Orwell Youth Prize last year, so I've been a youth fellow for a year now.
Great, thanks. Oh no, go on. So yeah, I was just going to say, so the Orwell Youth Fellows have been working on this project called the Digitalis Archives, and so Bella, Arishi and Oluwatoni are now going to explain exactly what that means and how they sort of came up with the idea.
So as Grace just said, our latest project is called Who's in Control. We've done it in a digital format because the theme of the world we've created is a totalitarian society where an AI has been allowed to run loose and has essentially taken over modern society as we know it. It's a very interesting blend. We have many different forms of media. So we have textbooks, we have podcasts, we have stories, and we have letters written to friends and family. And we really wanted to do it in this investigative style, where you can see that the events that have taken place happened in the past, but it also feels very real to the reader in the moment. Next, I'm going to be handing over to Arishi, who's going to talk about one of the main elements of our universe. And after that, you'll hear from Bella, who will tell you a bit more about the archive structure and how we chose to present it.
So the digitalist world, which is what we've called it, is this hyper-capitalist authoritarian society. And we decided to show this through the brand of Giga, which is an energy drink manufacturer that recurs throughout all of our pieces in some form or another. And it has a sort of insidious influence on not only the way people consume goods in this economy, but the way that they generally act and learn as well. So I'll hand over to Bella now.
As Oluwatoyin mentioned, we've kind of structured our world around an archive structure. Because we're a kind of group of young writers who have all come together and are working on this together, we all have very different kind of key media that we like to write in and express our thoughts in. And so this allowed us to kind of mix up all of these different types of media, as Oluwatoyin said, some non-fiction, some fiction, poetry, adverts, all kinds of fun stuff. And we used the archive structure to kind of provide a little bit of distance, I think, to allow a more objective glimpse into this society that we've created. A little bit of a kind of spiritual successor to 1984, Winston's Notebook. And it also then leaves you questions about the subjectivity of what you've been reading. And we use the blog Substack to do this. And so if you sign up, then all of the little different snippets are sent through email. And we thought that then allows you to kind of process them at a kind of steady pace and get a really nice mixed glimpse into this world that we've created.
Thanks, that was great. And yeah, I've put a link in the chat where you can subscribe to the Substack, so you'll get an email, I think, is it two every week, of each individual work, one at a time, so you can kind of digest them slowly at your own pace. All right, so let's get stuck right into it. Oluwatoyin is going to read first. So you have imagined a piece of legislation from this world of digitalis, and you are going to read an extract from that for us now.
Thank you, Grace. So my piece is called The Entertainment Embargo, and it's about the role that entertainment plays in our society that we've created here. As in any totalitarian sort of state, you have to control what the people consume in order to control what the people think. So I hope you enjoyed this next extract, and I will be reading about a third of the way through the piece. Bill G-101 of the Digitalis Republic for Motivational Benefit, alias the Entertainment Embargo. On this day, December 31st, 2000 unknown. Section 101.1. This section aims to outline the laws surrounding the creation, distribution, perpetuation, and consumption of all forms of creative media, by which the government means any media that could be viewed as entertainment, given how vapid the minds of present society have become. Whereas the government recognizes the inexplicable demand for entertainment within society as a perceived respite from the desirable objective of working to be productive and being productive to work, and multiplying the output and efficiency of present society as a gesture of benevolence, no resident of the Digitalis Republic for motivational benefit, whether a citizen or external visitor, shall consume any media of any type or manner that was created, endorsed, contributed to, or vetted by an entity that is not A, linked to, B, sponsored by, or C, endorsed by the government, in order to prevent the spread of unlawful, incendiary, or otherwise harmful content to broader society. Media meaning photographs, video or video format recordings, music, writings like stories, plays, books of either a fiction or non-fiction variety, audio recordings of any variety, including but not limited to podcasts and nature recordings, clothing and accessories, artwork, including but not limited to canvas, modern or abstract art. All forms of media must be produced, endorsed, or otherwise vetted by the government, government-affiliated entities, individuals and companies, any government representatives, or any representatives from Giga Unlimited, in order to ensure effective curation and responsible messaging to any citizens, visitors, or residents of the Digitalis Republic for motivational benefit. In connection to G101.12, no citizens, visitors to, or residents of the Digitalis Republic for motivational benefit shall be found in unlawful possession of, connection to, within earshot, line of sight, goosebump distance, or indeed breathing range of any forms of media outlined in Clause 1. In connection with S101.12, to ensure the perpetuation of acceptable content for the entertainment of wider society of workers, the processes of reproducing and selling counterfeit works of government agencies, affiliates, and or representatives from Giga Unlimited are to be encouraged and rewarded within the confines of the Digitalist Republic for motivational benefit. As a side note, however, the reproduction, distribution, or selling of government-released works outside of the Digitalist Republic for motivational benefit shall be severely punished when the offender is captured. This measure is aimed at preserving the integrity of the media and maintaining a clear demarcation between what is fiction and what is not. Thank you.
Thanks, Oluwatoni. That was great. And that is, that's just an extract from Oluwatoni's work. So do subscribe to the Substack to hear the whole thing in due course, because it's really great. So first question for you, what was the inspiration behind this piece? Where did the idea come from?
So earlier on this year, I wrote a piece for the Orwell Youth Prize, and it's a summary of one of my favorite Netflix shows, How to Become a Tyrant. And in that show, they really explained in depth how dictators in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries were able to use laws and rules not only as a means for controlling the citizens, but also instilling fear of the consequences. So you have two sides to this. On the one side, you're telling people what they should do and what they can't do. And then you're also telling them the repercussions if they even dare to step out of line. In addition to this, the main reason I know the formats for legal sorts of documents, I'm a very avid watcher of a YouTube channel called Legal, which is generally comedic content relating to the misinterpretation of laws, but also gets quite serious when you start talking about real life politics. And I found I was quite inspired by Legal's use of not only humor, but also the analysis of actual clauses and side notes and little footnotes, all the stuff that you wouldn't generally want to read through in a law, to show people that the law doesn't have to be as inaccessible as most people want you to think.
Great, thank you. That's a really clear answer. So do you see any echoes in this bill that you've written here? Do you see any echoes of that in sort of some of the things that are happening in the world today at all?
In terms of real life echoes or inspiration, I might say, what I've noticed has become a big trend is productivity trends. So you have things like study talk on TikTok, study tube on YouTube. You even have dressing aesthetics like dark academia or light academia. And what I've noticed is that in our present society, as much as we like to take breaks for mental health, and that is extremely important, I think it's also worth noting that there seems to be a productivity craze whereby you're being told to do certain things like buy this highlighter or get these calligraphy pens or make your notes all aesthetic. And people are sort of tricked into the mentality that if you do these kinds of things, you will definitely pass your classes and you will definitely succeed. And while it's not impossible, maybe it's not even unlikely, I don't think it's a healthy attitude to force people to do things one specific way in order for them to achieve sort of success in their academic or working lives.
Yeah, definitely. I really love that line in your piece. It says the desirable work of working to be productive and being productive to work, which I think sums it up really well. So what exactly is it that we're working towards? Somehow it sort of never arrives. So I also was thinking when I was reading your piece, I really liked that you focused on sort of entertainment as a theme, because when I was sort of reading through the works that we're going to hear tonight, I was thinking these are all really important, sort of politically motivated works, but they're also entertaining. Like this, literature is in some ways entertainment, and so I was really struck by how those two things don't have to be separate, politics and entertainment. That was just what I was thinking as I was reading it. Final question for you: how optimistic or pessimistic do you feel about the sort of future of work in this country and the sort of cult of productivity that you've been describing?
I think in terms of productivity culture, we're starting to shift away from the general perception of what it means to be productive. So if we look at the last couple of years that we've had with the COVID pandemic and the sort of onslaught and waves of working from home, schooling from home, what used to be the sort of old school mentality of productivity would be a 9 to 5 job where you go into the office, sit down at a desk, fill out a bunch of forms, maybe type some emails and then go home. But we're starting to redefine what it means to be almost sort of working in a way. So now people can stay at home. There are more flexible hours available to ensure that people are taking good enough breaks, not only for their mental health, but to be able to see their family, or if they're raising a family of their own, they're able to do that now. So I think in general, we're shifting away from the idea that you have to be in work for a specific amount of time in order to be productive. I think the meaning of productivity is also changing in a sort of way. I feel like people are thinking more now about personal satisfaction and how their job is impacting their life, as opposed to just the amount of money they're making.
I think we've lost you there, Oluwatoyin, but I think okay, I'm gonna.
In general, I do think I would say.
Okay, I'm gonna. Oh no. Okay, yeah, we're good. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up there with Oluwatoyin. I think you had just felt we're wrapping up your answer there. We lost you just a tiny bit with the internet, but we will be hearing from Oluwatoyin again later on in the conversation when we go to Q&A. So that will be nice. The other thing to remember is don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A box. We've got some really good ones coming in so far, and we'll get through as many of them as possible towards the end. So onwards to Arushi. Arushi has written a short story that's set in this world of Digitalis, and she's going to read a short extract from it tonight. But before you start reading, Arushi, could you just sort of set the scene, what this story is about?
Yeah, so my story is called The Ministry, and it's about this woman who's lost everything to climate disaster, and she's seeking government aid. But she's subjected to dehumanizing treatment and faces this impossibly convoluted system and the constant presence of AI. So that's sort of what the story is about. And I'll be starting at the point in it where she arrives at this ministry. So at the end of this street, there stood a squarish building constructed solidly in the old style. And it was before this building that she stopped and absentmindedly shook her dry umbrella. A young man materialized on the pavement in front of her, glitching slightly. "Good morning," it said, "and a warm welcome to the Digitalis Ministry of Miracles, London Division. Please state your full name, citizen identification code, and the purpose of your visit for security purposes." "Triple Astatina 101 Bleep, ID 172942, job, housing, and livelihood interview, economy tier." The man turned bright green for a moment, its face replaced by an enormous glowing tick. "Thank you. Access verified. If you would like to follow me." The doors slid neatly open. Mrs. Bleep hugged her bag as it was scanned, then again as she was. She was asked to leave the umbrella outside. She complied. The young man, now less pixelated, led her to a plastic seat and asked her to wait. "I'm George. Would you like my company while you wait? I know these things can be stressful," it asked sympathetically, "and I've been updated just this week with the latest in Giga AI. I'm told my jokes are a lot funnier now, but personally, I'm not sure. Your estimated wait time is 6 hours and 17 minutes. We have a special Tuesday package deal, so it would only cost you £416.2473. Would you like me to stay with you?" Mrs. Bleep shook her head slowly. "I only brought enough for the train fare back. Sorry." George beamed and promptly vanished. When she woke, she was in the same chair in a different room. There was, in no particular order, a man and a desk, and neither looked very pleased to see her. The man stopped flicking through his papers and looked up. "Good evening, Mrs. Bleep. I trust you had a pleasant journey. Where is it that you live?" "Call me Tina, Dover, with my husband. We have a little house by the sea. Well, in the sea, actually. It's underwater now. He eyed her warily, as if she were a bit of bread he was scrutinizing for mold. Right then, I'm Officer Spuckle. I will be conducting your interview today. He looked down at his forms, then quickly back up again. I didn't think anyone still lived in Dover. Not after the ocean reclamation project. We do, she admitted, not unashamedly. I didn't know it was a project. That does appear to be the case, he conceded. Well, Mrs. Bleep, tell me about your husband. Doesn't he work? Not since he lost his legs manning the tidal turbines. No more wheelchair ramps. Spuckle checked his forms again. So you need to find an income soon, is that right? Haven't you explored the subsidized organ donation programs? Mrs. Bleep nodded. I've had my scans. My viability grade was too low. They said I was 57% sucrose and 23% unidentifiable toxic sludge.
Thanks, Arishi. That was a really great extract. So same question to begin with you is, where did this idea come from? What was the starting point for writing this story?
So I was really interested in these themes of what happens if we let the climate crisis go too far, if we don't intervene at all. And also with AI, we don't know where it's going. In 10 years' time or 20 years' time, we could be looking at a society where it's completely ingrained in everything that we do, or it could just fade away in the next few years. We don't know at this point. So that was something that I really wanted to explore, and what both those things would mean for an individual's rights. So I knew that I wanted to write it from the perspective of a very average person who doesn't have much power in this society and what that means for them. So that was sort of the things that I was thinking about.
Yeah, and I think the story does that really, really beautifully. And I would really recommend people to read the whole thing when it comes through on the Substack. So in your piece, you sort of paint a picture of what it's like to live under a sort of autocratic government. And some people will say that strong leadership, that the strong leadership that comes with autocracy can provide more effective decision making and quick decision making in the face of the climate crisis, because it can make difficult decisions quickly because it doesn't have to consult or compromise in the ways that we do in democracy. What do you think about that?
I think at face value, that argument does seem sensible, that we need decisive action. But if you start looking at the evidence, historically speaking, how autocracies have handled the climate crisis, we begin to see that they haven't been as effective as you would expect. So take China, for example, one of the world's biggest autocracies. And even though they have enacted policies aiming to decarbonize, they've actually done the opposite. They've moved towards more coal-powered infrastructure. And another thing to bear in mind is that autocrats always have their own vested interests. They're not this benevolent entity that's going to somehow magic away the climate crisis because they can do things without debating them. But at least with democratic leaders, you have some accountability to some extent, whereas with an autocrat, you don't have that at all. And with politicians, there's a lot of funding and lobbying from the fossil fuel industries. And in an autocratic government, I think that would still be the case, but it would be less transparent and the public wouldn't really know who's funding their representatives. Whereas in a democracy, there is this fundamental responsibility to disclose that. So I think it's also especially important that we have democracy to deal with the climate crisis, because we need inputs from those who are affected by it. A lot of the time, the political elite has very little direct experience of what the climate crisis means for people. And it's very important that we hear from those people who are directly affected. So even though democracy does have its flaws, you could say it's not as decisive, I think ultimately to guard against abuses of power and transparency, like those fundamental principles are very important going forward.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's something that this story really illustrates, like so succinctly and well. When we chatted before the event about your story, you mentioned that you think that democracy in its current form, though, is not effectively tackling the climate crisis. So what do you think needs to change in our democracy for it to be able to do that?
So for any democracy to take action that concretely addresses the climate crisis, you need people to be well informed. You need them to know who they're voting for and what those policies will mean for them. And we're seeing today with social media, there's this rising tide of disinformation and misinformation, which means that we don't have that. And that's something that you need for any democracy to be effective. So I think we really need to be working on improving scientific literacy, especially to do with the climate crisis. But more generally, we need to fight against this disinformation that's taking over social media, because we've seen with the pandemic how dangerous it's been when people become completely radicalized by things that they read online. And that, I think, attacks the foundations of democracy that we're trying to preserve. And also, I think it's also important to pressure policymakers, because they're often quite short-sighted. They're more focused on winning the next election than making lasting change. And that needs to be changed. And that can only change with public pressure. So I think that's something as well. And in terms of democracy on a global scale, I think those democratic principles that we apply to a single country need to be extended to the world at large, because the global north, generally speaking, has been more responsible for the emissions that have caused the climate to change, more so than the global south and less wealthy countries. So we need that principle of accountability, but between countries as well, because without that, there's no way that the entire world can act.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Arishi. And I think I was really interested to hear you speaking about disinformation, especially. I'm sure we'll kind of get into that a bit more in the Q&A section later. So yeah, thank you for that. And we're going to move on now to Bella, who is our last reader for this first section. Bella has written a poem which is set in this world of digitalis. So over to you, Bella.
Yes, hi. So this poem is untitled. Yeah, I guess that's all I'll say about it. I'll read it. We've run out of things to do with the words. I wake up at 5 a.m, my head backlogged with last night's dream. I wash it away with a drink, drive to work in 20 minutes, and only idle in traffic for 5. 5 hours of work, 20 minutes for a break. Drink a drink, feel my neurons fizzle awake like something. A popped tab, a shaking can. My job is to attach the tabs that will later be unattached by my own hands. 2 times 5 more hours of work. Drive home in 20 minutes. It's never dark in this city where every billboard knows you. My own face gleams out at me from an advert on the roadside. She has already approved the product with a hungry smile an inch away from satisfied. Which makes me feel my tongue is dead. The words are dead batteries, their power is gone. The feeling is grooves in a desk. It's progress, it's perfect lines, it's practice twist of a phrase. My own brain is sedated and reverts back to what it was at the start. Naked, pink, insensate, shivering. It's 8:24 p.m. in my room in the dark. The image curls up like a baby. I hold it. I love you so much, it hurts to think about it. I want to breathe and breathe. Eating in a hurry, fast forwarding, faster, faster than minds hold from the strong light in the seams. My neurons are firing like torches. It hurts to love until I think wrong. We've run out of things to do with the words.
Thanks, Bella. That was great. So first question for you is, tell us more about who's speaking in this poem. What's their story?
Well, the wonderful thing is we don't know. The structure of the archives has meant we get to take texts out of their contexts. And in this case, I feel like that's something a poem really lends itself for as a kind of structure, because it allowed me to write something that was both very universal, and I hope that was indicated by the kind of daily routine is intended to be a kind of suggestion of what life might be like under a kind of relentlessly capitalist society, whilst also being deeply personal at the same time. And I wrote a contextual note to go at the end of this. And again, that's another thing we've got to explore in this kind of archive structure. Paratext we've got to introduce as well. And that's another question. We aren't quite sure who's writing these notes either. So we're both not aware of who's written what we're reading, and also we're not aware of who's kind of put together what we're reading, all of which then could leave you questions about the subjectivity of what you're reading, the accuracy, and that's just something that's really interesting. But the contextual notes read, one of the rare extracts of verse to come out of Digitalis. Whilst it is impossible to be certain and some sections appear censored or corrupted, we believe it was composed by a human. And that was one of the things that we thought when we were considering AI as a sort of subject. If we take all of this work outside of its context, we don't know who's written it, we can't even be aware whether or not it's a human person or an AI. And this individual in particular is struggling with that concept, is struggling to express herself creatively in a society that hasn't really allowed her much freedom of thought, and which has encouraged art to kind of be taken away from the hands of individuals and placed into a corporate structure. So yeah, I'd say that's the kind of speaker there.
Great, thank you. And yeah, the next question sort of follows on from that. So the poem alludes to the importance of language and the power when it comes to expressing emotions. As a poet yourself, do you think poetry and literature have a role to play in a sort of free and democratic society? And if so, what would that be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think freedom to express yourself creatively goes hand in hand with freedom of speech. And that when we begin to kind of place controls and fetters on the media, that's a kind of slippery slope towards losing freedom in other areas. Because we're kind of not fully aware of how influential this entertainment that we absorb is on a daily basis. It's not just about kind of being entertaining, there will always be kind of other ideas there, and it's one of the most persuasive possible ways you can have of making political change. That's what we believe in the Orwell Youth Fellows, that's the reason why we write. And so it's really important to allow that to be a medium for political change and to not restrict the freedom that individuals have to express themselves in that way, because that's the way in which you kind of begin to silence voices that otherwise don't really have an opportunity to speak on a political level. So for young people like us especially, I mean, I'm 20 years old, I'm not going to be able to go into politics, but I can write a poem and that can express the way that I feel about things that might otherwise be inaccessible to me. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important.
Sure, yeah, agreed. So then that leads me quite nicely on that we're going to now leave the world of Digitalis behind and come into the here and now, because Bella's next poem is set very much in the present day. So I will hand it back over to you, Bella, for the next one.
Yes, this one's called All Our Boroughs Are Rotting. And as Grace suggested, it's based on a more personal experience with the kind of democratic process. So yeah, I'll go ahead. There is an ancient church in the city where I study, made of cobbled stone, grey glass and gargoyles. By day it is imposing and empty, rows of voided velvet seats, hallowed and hollow. Only at night do the students congregate and smoke outside the wooden doors. I haven't stepped foot in a church in 5 years without the sardonic fear of bursting into flames, but as the slip of paper falls into the ballot gullet, I watch it disappear like a prayer, an act of empty faith. Tonight, the students will return with their IDs and chips wrapped in the doom-mongering front pages, and if politics come up whilst they're sharing smoke, the words will be dead batteries. Because trying to engage in politics is like leaning against closed doors and watching cars crash in the street at your feet, or knowing you've bet on a horse that will lose over and over whilst the thing looming over you is cobbled stone, clenched shut, immovable but also liable to collapse and crush at any moment, malevolent and stupid. And for 13 years that feeling grinds you down, the knowledge that it wants to crush you and there's nothing you can do, armed only with what it hasn't yet taken away, a slip of paper and a prayer. That's tonight. Today, the polling station is imposing and empty. I guess most have forgotten to register.
Thanks, Bella. It's a great poem and very sad, very relatable. So it's an incredibly powerful piece, I think. So you told me, and you mentioned at the beginning, that poem is inspired by your own experience of voting for the first time. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so I voted for the first time in my university constituency in a church, which sort of rang with symbolic resonance for me, because I felt as if I kind of had about as much faith in the vote that I was placing as I kind of did in the sort of air around me. And in particular, the main thing that was striking was that it was so empty. I go to school with people who are really intelligent, who are deeply engaged in politics, in the sense that they're deeply worried about politics, and yet the amount of them that just hadn't registered to vote, had forgotten, or kind of addressed it in a way that felt very blasé. They didn't feel that that was actually going to have any kind of impact, which is deeply sad, but I feel deeply relatable as well, because I've always been someone who's cared deeply about politics. And when I was younger, I used to be very, very engaged in kind of current events. And it's only as I've gotten older that not only do I feel more disenfranchised from both the physical act of voting, which I've been looking forward to almost as a kid. It was the kind of thing that I was so eager to be able to kind of make my mark in an electoral sense. But when I placed my vote, I felt nothing. And I feel like that sense of being jaded, that sense of not feeling as if your political acts make much of an impact, that's something that's far more relatable to young people than actually feeling like they don't care about politics. We care deeply about politics. We just don't believe that it's something that we actually get to engage in. It's something that's more of a threat than anything else.
Yeah, sure. That's really, really beautifully put. So on that point, so the right to vote is obviously something that people have fought for a long time, and sometimes even died for. But yeah, I think a lot of people of all ages will relate to the feelings that you bring up in the poem, that yeah, voting sometimes just feels like a sort of desperate howl into the abyss. So what do you think's gone wrong? Like, why here in 2023 does it feel like that?
I think one of the big reasons I personally feel as if my vote doesn't matter a huge amount, I suggested it in the title, which is a reference to the rotten boroughs that used to be around in the kind of, I think it was probably 19th, 18th centuries, which were basically fake constituencies that were set up by individual MPs who would then automatically win a seat in government, but not actually be representing anyone. And I feel as if our electoral system, this first past the post system, more and more I see some of those flaws beginning to repeat, particularly the fact that I live in an area that is a party stronghold. And so when I place a vote, it does feel as if it disappears into nothingness, that then the person who is voted in to represent me hypothetically, and that should be one of the virtues of having an individual who represents your area, you should feel as if your interests are being advocated for, then doesn't actually represent my policies or politics whatsoever. So I feel as if that's one of a big reason, and that system that we use now, I just don't think it works. And I think continuing to use it is only going to increasingly mean more and more people feel like their vote doesn't count. There's also the fact that the rise in political corruption, certainly that I've become aware of as I grow up, the sense that there is far less kind of holding politicians accountable. And so that can then lead to the feeling that no matter who you vote for, you're not necessarily going to get someone who has pure intentions, that kind of all politicians are the same. And that also means that if you live somewhere where I live, you're probably going to be voting against one specific party far more than you're actually going to be voting for the interests of someone else, because it doesn't come down to actually believing in a party. It comes down to trying to defend yourself against the people who you know are going to actively be campaigning against your interests. So more and more, politics feels less like something you engage in and more like something you're kind of fighting against and you're defending yourself against. And so, yeah, those are some of the biggest flaws I feel like kind of stand out to me in our voting system.
Yeah, that's really clear. And yeah, I can agree on the safe seats thing. I've lived in a lot of different places, but I've never had a vote that counted. So, you know, a lot of us are in the same boat with that one. So really quickly, before we hand over to audience Q&A, there's one more poem from Bella that we're going to just listen to, and then we'll go straight into the audience Q&A.
Yes, thank you. This poem is an ekphrastic poem, which means it was written based on a piece of artwork, and that piece of artwork will hopefully speak for itself. It is called The Burning of the Houses of Lords and Commons. It was created in 1834 by J.N.W. Turner. All that tinder silently smouldering, sharing air under the stone ceiling, stone floor. So hot it could melt brogues, but no one's around but the housekeeper to see the smoke and the soot and say, that's not my problem. No one is in the building when it burns, catches light like an empty wasp's nest. The tapestries bleed into watercolour and the ancient wood crumbles to fresh ash. People line the Thames and watch it, silently smouldering. And when the roof falls in, a single voice cheers like a child on bonfire night who sees the beginning and the end of winter in the hot flames. It must have looked like the end of the world, winking up like eyes from the water. But they rebuilt it in the Tudor Gothic style, one step forward, 300 years back.
Thanks very much, Bella. And anyone who wants to read those two last poems, I will also send them around to everyone who's registered for this call afterwards. So they won't be part of the Digitalis archives, but you will get to read them again. So on to questions. So Bella, Arushi and Oluwatoni, if you all just want to jump in with your answers to this, we'll take it as it comes. So a few people have been saying in the chat, don't be disillusioned, you should, not give up on politics, etc. We won't hold you to this answer, but would you ever consider running for elected office? And if so, why or why not? Who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go. That's a bit of a tricky question, because while one always thinks that you can be the change and you can be the embodiment of like a new set of generations, ideals and morals, all too often I feel like the sort of heroicness of what you want to achieve gets lost in how you're trying to achieve it. So as we were talking about earlier with like disillusionment and things like that, you start out wanting to make all these major changes, but then you realize that it's generally not that easy to sort of overturn an establishment that's been standing for a long time. In addition to that, I would also say that people are just not really fans of politicians nowadays, because I feel like a few years ago, maybe a couple of decades, politicians were sort of like heroes of the time that you sort of looked up to, and you think this is the person who's representing most closely what I believe in. But then I feel like more recently, people are starting to realize that politics is a cutthroat game, and it doesn't matter what your morals and beliefs are, because a lot of the time it's just about the power. So to cut a long story short, I don't think I would personally run for office, just because it can be very easy to lose yourself in the sort of power struggles and just trying to get things done. But what I would be really interested in is doing like some journalistic writing. So I recently did an entry for a climate change competition at school, and I found that I really enjoyed the journalistic sort of style where you do an interview, then you write about some things, and then you plug in quotes or ideas from the interview, as opposed to just writing completely fiction or completely non-fiction. So kind of a mix of both, I guess.
I agree with Oluwatoni. I was just going to say that I think if you are a politician, it's very easy to have a completely different set of incentives. And it's sometimes difficult to stay true to what your values are, because you're so preoccupied with re-election and campaigning. So I wouldn't want to run for office if it meant I would have to compromise on my values. And I mean, if you take this yes minister kind of view of how the civil service works, it's all very traditional, and it just aims to keep itself going the way that it is. Nobody's willing to do any radical changes because that would risk their own position. So I think as long as that is the case, it might be more effective to, as Oluwatoni was saying, change people's minds through writing. And personally, I love science, and I'm hoping to make contributions in climate science and scientific literacy. as I was saying earlier, to try and fight that disinformation that's such a huge problem today. So I'm not ruling it out, but I don't think politics is where I'm headed.
So, Bella, anything to add?
No, they covered it perfectly. I feel the exact same way.
Great. Okay, fair enough. So I think one more question from the audience before we move on to the next stage. So a few people were asking about the world of digitalis. Do you see this as a possible future for the UK, like a warning, or do you think that things are not going to get that bad? How do you feel it fits into the sort of timeline that we're on at the moment?
Sorry.
You go.
I was just going to say, it's sort of like Orwell's 1984 society. It's not exactly what we see the world as in so many decades. And in fact, we haven't said exactly when digitalis is set, when those pieces of evidence from the archive are from. But there are elements of truth in it, even if they are a bit exaggerated. We're definitely, all of us, very concerned with how we're headed with the climate crisis and how far that could escalate if we don't take action soon. And also these issues of artificial intelligence and how that's going to compromise our creativity as human beings. So I think those fundamental issues are definitely very pressing at the moment. And some of this could someday become true, hopefully not, but there are elements of truth in it, I would say.
Sort of like what Arushi was saying, I'm not really imagining a Terminator or Matrix type of situation when I think about digitalis and the digitalis archives. I think the work is very allegorical in a sense, and not necessarily just for the UK, but even around the world. One of my main focuses is writing about inequality and economic disparity, and I sort of take digitalis as a metaphor for how world powers, or maybe not even world powers, but just more powerful countries, can take advantage of not only the resources, but also creativity of up and coming nations. So I think one of the best real world examples we sort of have is the United States and South Korea at the minute, where you have this influence of Korean culture, so like K-pop and Korean animes coming into the US, which people are enjoying. But then at the same time, the US and Western culture is simultaneously getting more of a grasp on Korean people. So they're losing some of their more traditional values. And while it's always nice to see a culture spreading, I think it is in a way sort of very loosely related to the digitalis archives and what we've sort of created with this world. So I think it's really important that we not only take this as a sort of warning, just like George Orwell said we should when he wrote 1984, that being one of the biggest inspirations for the archives. But I also think it's really important that we keep an eye out for any insidious sort of, any insidious sort of dominating behaviors that different parties might insert on one another. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's really one of the strengths of the work, is like just like some of the best writing about dystopias like 1984. It's not literal, like saying this could happen. It's more exploring the ideas and the sort of imagining how we might get there and the sort of extreme versions of things which are already happening. And I think that's why it's such a strong work. We are just about on schedule, which I am amazed by. There's just so much good stuff to talk about tonight that I really thought we were gonna get behind. But in this last section, we're really lucky tonight. We're being joined by two of the winners of this year's Orwell Youth Prize. The winners were announced just a week or so ago, so it's pretty fresh news. So we've got Amelia and Beth, and they are going to read for us tonight just some extracts from their work, which they won the prize for. So yeah, that's over to you, Amelia and Beth.
Okay, I'm Beth. I won from like the junior section. I wrote kind of like an article, journalistic piece about like meritocracy and that sort of idea, and how it's becoming more present in our society as we're trying to move away from like the sort of past where it's been like money and like an aristocracy, but then how this is still like a dangerous idea. The media.
Would you like to read your work now, Beth, and then we'll go to Amelia?
Yeah, okay, so this is just like a short excerpt from it. My piece is called Meritocracy, the Politician's Pipe Dream. So, upon first glance, a meritocracy, a world in which people can go as far as their merit takes them, and where those in power are there because of their own merit, seems to be a good thing, a marker of an equal society, and something within our grasp. For example, take the grammar school system. Students who pass the test have the opportunity to aim high in an academically oriented school, push for the highest grades, and attend top universities. However, I'm in the majority of students who are tutored to pass the 11 plus. It is no longer the smartest students who are passing the test, it's the richest ones. This illusion of meritocracy creates the idea amongst grammar school students that they are more worthy than their peers, and any success that comes their way is a product of their own hard work and talents, rather than a combination of effort, opportunity, and most importantly, luck. This encourages them to look down on their less successful peers. If the winners deserve their success, then the losers deserve their squalor. This meritocratic hubris is inescapable as long as humans insist on being a selfish species. The Achilles heel of a meritocracy is not its own fault. Instead, it is due to our society's values. Perhaps if we were to completely reconstruct society from its foundations, a fair meritocracy would be viable, but the ideas that rule make it an impossibility. A meritocracy cannot work in a society that values superiority over success like our own. For how can one go as far as the merit takes them when there can only be the top 1% with the other 99 below it? Someone, in fact, most people have to be losing, just so those who do win can gorge themselves on their spoils. The attraction of meritocracy is its promise of equality, but how can a society with superiority as its pillar be, in any way, shape, or form, equal? Another pitfall of meritocracy is the fault of our society. The idea of being successful is almost synonymous with being wealthy. You're not seen as successful if you're not wealthy, and you are successful if you are wealthy, with no regard to how hard you've worked or how good you are at what you do, as it is assumed that you must be one of the elites to walk among them. That's just an excerpt, but.
Thanks, Beth. And yeah, I put a link in the chat if anyone wants to read the full thing, and indeed all the works from this year's prize. Amelia, over to you.
So I wrote a short story, largely based around the changing of Roe versus Wade in America. And I wrote it in the context of a woman sitting there waiting for the results of a pregnancy test to come through. And she's checking the news and she's just contemplating why anyone would want to have a child in the first place. So here's the excerpt. 2 minutes. 2 minutes in which you read how youth suicide rates have increased dramatically. Children who haven't had their chance to make positive impacts on the world, to teach others to do better, to not make the same mistakes that have led us to this avalanche of depression, ending their existences because they can't cope anymore. They murder themselves with knives, with alcohol, with drugs, the things they shouldn't have access to and yet use to take away the pain, anything to get that clarity, that swooping high that is wrongly given in the form of pills, drink and blades. Why are children feeling so desperate that they want to die? And why is society shunning them as if they have scars on their bodies, or a constant smell of alcohol, or constant mood changes from withdrawal? Why are parents doing nothing, feeling disappointed they've been saddled with these burdens they forget they've created and were supposed to have nurtured, cared for, rocked through tears? The children whose parents should have waited at the school gates, held them quietly after a nightmare, cried for them at graduations, fed them, clothed them, loved them. The children who are shouted at, blamed, locked away, manipulated into believing that they are unworthy of love or time. The children who are hit, abandoned, starved, forced to endure torment that they didn't ask for and do not deserve. 1 minute. 1 minute in which you contemplate why anyone would want to bring a child into this world anyway. Why have a child if it will only be put through all the torture that the universe has to offer? Allowing the child's soul to go and be at peace before it has to face the horrors would be so much kinder, so much less painful for both of you. The baby you will be forced to carry for 9 long months of suffering because 5 judges, all of whom aren't part of the generation of fighters, of protesters, of people who want their rights, made you the criminal if you decide that you don't want to raise a child in this god-awful world. 5 judges, 4 of whom are men, who've never had to worry about pregnancy, who've never had to wonder if one wrong move could ruin their lives, who've never had to clutch keys between their knuckles and hurry past catcalling drunks propped up in alleyways, no one to hear you scream if the worst happened. The men who are allowed to make decisions for millions of women despite having never felt the relief at the sight of blood on a sanitary towel. The knowledge that you won't have to worry about a child in this cruel world is the greatest relief in the universe. The woman who agreed with them because of the age-old ideals people are blinded with. The ideals that people have to fight to change and unlearn. 0 minutes, 5 judges and 2 lives, 5 minutes and 2 lines.
Thanks, Amelia. That was great. And yeah, a really powerful piece. So I actually just have one more question for the youth fellows before we close. You can just jump in with your answers, and if you don't want to answer it, you can skip it. So we visited a dystopia tonight, and we've also had quite a long, hard look at some of the darker corners of our own reality. And I think it's really important to do that. One of the purposes of thought-provoking political writing, like what we've seen today, is that it can help us to grasp the scale and the seriousness of the problems that we need to solve. But I think we also do need to hold on to a bit of hope and positivity if we're going to keep campaigning, keep writing, keep turning up on a Tuesday night to talk about politics and, how we're going to fix these problems. And also if the audience want to answer this question in the chat as well, that would be great. But can you all tell me, if you can, one thing that kind of keeps you going and keeps your hope alive when things are looking grim? Who wants to go first?
I could go first.
Go on.
I think it's the fact that we're not as divided as we may seem. So the narrative that we see in the media is that this is an age of increasing polarization and nobody can seemingly agree on anything. And to some extent that is true, but there have been studies showing that people are actually more united on the fundamental issues than we would think. So people who are more conservative and more liberal, everyone agrees that we need to uphold those fundamental principles of democracy. And I think something like more than 60% of people agree that action is needed on the climate. So we do have that fundamental agreement. And as long as we have that, then we can achieve change.
Thanks, Harishi. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll go next. So I have a couple of things, actually. One of them is, first of all, my Cope was saying about marginalized groups in community. And I feel like the fact that we're beginning to take notice of those marginalized people and like seeing their struggles and understanding where they come from and why they're in such an unfortunate position, sort of, is really important, because as Arushi was saying, it helps to bring everyone together and sort of lessen the gaps between the haves and the have-nots in society, if you will. The other thing I wanted to point out is that we seem to be finding more of, this is going to sound very cliche, but I feel like the next generation of people coming up is making a lot of changes, be it to their lifestyles or just changing the perspectives from like an older sort of viewpoint. And not just that, but being, fairly respectful and considerate when they share their opinions. I feel like everyone's always arguing and there's just so much noise around us most of the time. And it makes me really happy to see those instances where there's someone who's willing to hear both sides of the argument and is willing to be convinced, willing to say that, okay, you know what, I was wrong, thank you for your corrections. And just that sort of general progressiveness we're seeing as the next generation comes in.
Wonderful. Anyone else want to have the last word?
I agree with Oluwatoni that our generation makes me feel really good about the direction we're heading in, especially writing with the youth fellows genuinely has given me so much more of a hope for the kind of future that we're heading towards. Seeing everyone's good humor, their incredibly insightful ideas about our society and the way we can move forward. Yeah, there's kind of nothing better than kind of working together and feeling as if, there is that kind of impetus to move forward, and that there are young people who not only care about the future that we're moving towards, but are so talented at writing about it. And it inspires me a lot. Every single one of them does. And it's a wonderful kind of community feeling that gives me a lot of hope.
What a great note to end on. Thank you, Bella, for that. And thank you to all the youth fellows for reading tonight so well for us and for taking part in such a great discussion. Tabby, do you have anything to add before we close up?
No, only thank you, Grace, and Unlock Democracy, and all of you for being here tonight. It's been a really interesting event. I've been so impressed by all of your answers. I was thinking, what would I say in answer to some of those questions, Grace? And I don't think I'd be able to say anything anywhere near as articulate as that. So yeah, thank you all for joining, and do subscribe to the Substack. It's only just been launched today, so it's all really fresh. This is sort of a launch for it, and more work will be coming into your inboxes over the next 6 weeks or so. Do look out for that.
Great, thank you, Tabby, and thanks again to all the youth fellows. Thank you for your wonderful writing, and can't wait to see what you guys do next, what the youth fellows produce in the future. So yeah, good night, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.